Forget everything you think you know about the Wild West. Those black and white movies, the noble gunslingers, and mustache-twirling villains. The reality was a lot grittier, a lot more complex, and frankly, a lot more interesting. For every legendary lawman, there were a dozen outlaws whose stories have been twisted and romanticized over time. Today, we are re-pulling back the curtain on the Hollywood glamour to uncover the true stories of the Wild West's most infamous figures. We're going beyond the myths to find the real men and women behind the six-shooters. So, who were these outlaws? They weren't just one-dimensional bad guys. Many were veterans of the Civil War, struggling to find their place in a changed world. Others were young kids, but early adults swept up by the promise of easy money and adventure. They came from all walks of life, driven by poverty, desperation, or just a rebellious spirit that couldn't be tamed. The Wild West was a pressure cooker of vast, lawless frontier where a split-second decision could be the difference between life and death. For many, turning to a life of crime didn't seem like a choice. It seemed like the only way to survive. Let's start with a name everyone knows: Jesse James. Hollywood paints him as a Robin Hood figure, stealing from the rich to give to the poor. The truth? Not so much. Jesse and his brother Frank were former Confederate guerrillas, hardened by the brutality of the Civil War. They didn't target rich bankers out of a sense of justice. They targeted them because that's where the money was. Their gang, the James Younger Gang, terrorized Missouri and beyond for years, robbing banks, trains, and stage. They were ruthless killers, responsible for the deaths of countless bank clerks, train staff, and innocent bystanders. The Robin Hood narrative was largely a creation of one man, John Newman Edwards, a newspaper editor who used Jesse's story to promote a pro-Confederate agenda. For him, Jesse was a symbol of Southern rebellion, a hero fighting against Northern oppression. It was brilliant propaganda, and it created a myth that has lasted for over a century. The real Jesse James was a cold-blooded criminal, eventually betrayed and shot in the back by a member of his own gang, Robert Ford, for a bounty. Now, let's head down to the dusty Southwest and talk about Billy the Kid. His legend says he killed 21 men, one for every year of his life. The real number is probably closer to 8 or 9, which is still a lot, but it shows how easily facts get exaggerated. Born Henry McCarty, Billy was an orphan who fell into a life of petty crime. He wasn't a hardened killer from the start. He was a kid trying to get by. His story really takes off during the Lincoln County War in New Mexico, a violent conflict between rival business factions. Billy wasn't a lone wolf gunslinger. He was a hired gun, a regulator fighting on one side of a bloody land dispute. He was known for his charm and his surprising loyalty to his friends, but he was also deadly in a fight. After the war, he became a wanted man. The famous lawman Pat Garrett, who was once a friend of Billy's, was elected sheriff and tasked with bringing him in. After a dramatic escape from jail, Billy the Kid was finally cornered and shot by Garrett in a dark room at Fort Sumner. Was he a cold-hearted killer or a loyal soldier on the losing side of a local war? The answer, like most things in the West, is somewhere in between. Of course, it wasn't just men who made a name for themselves. Let's talk about Belle Starr, the so-called bandit queen. The legend paints her as a glamorous outlaw leader, riding at the head of a gang of horse thieves and bootleggers. She was often photographed in velvet dresses, with pistols on her hips, cultivating a very specific image. But was she really the criminal mastermind the newspapers made her out to be? Not exactly. Belle, born Mira May Bell, Shirley, associated with outlaws, including the Younger and James gangs. She married several men with criminal records and ran a homestead in Oklahoma, Snowman, Land, that became a known hideout for fugitives. She was convicted of horse theft once, but there's little evidence she ever planned or led major robberies. Most of her fame came from the sensationalized stories written about her after her death. She was a tough, independent woman who knew how to survive on the frontier and was unafraid to live outside the law. But the bandit queen persona was largely a media creation. Her end was as mysterious as her life. She was ambushed and killed by an unknown assailant, a murder that remains unsolved to this day. Then there's the legendary duo, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. Their story, immortalized in the famous movie is one of the most romanticized of all. Butch, whose real name was Robert Leroy Parker, was the brains of the operation. He was charming, clever, and famously preferred to avoid violence whenever possible. He led the Wild Bunch, a gang that specialized in robbing trains and banks with meticulous planning. His partner, Harry Longabaugh, the Sundance Kid, was the fast-drawing muscle. He was quiet, reserved, and a deadly shot. Together, they were incredibly successful, pulling off a string of daring heists that made them the most wanted men in America. But as the 19th century ended, the West was changing. Law enforcement was becoming more organized, and technology like the telegraph and railroad made it harder to escape. Feeling the pressure, Butch, Sundance, and Sundance's companion, Etta Place, famously fled to South America. They tried to go straight, buying a ranch in Argentina. But old habits die hard, and they soon returned to robbing banks. The end of their story is shrouded in mystery. The popular version is that they were cornered by the Bolivian army and died in a blaze of glory shootout. While it's a dramatic end, some historians argue that Butch Cassidy might have survived, returned to the United States, and lived out his days under a different name. We'll likely never know for sure, which only adds to their enduring legend. Let's not forget about the gangs that terrorized entire regions. The Dalton Gang, for instance, was made up of 3 brothers who started out as lawmen before turning to crime. They tried to outdo the James Younger Gang by attempting to rob 2 banks at the same time in Coffeyville, Kansas. It was an incredibly ambitious and foolish plan. The townspeople recognized them and fought back, turning the streets into a war zone. In the end, 2 of the brothers and most of their gang were killed. It was a brutal and swift end to their short-lived outlaw career. A harsh reminder that life on the wrong side of the law was often short and violent. What's fascinating is how these stories were shaped and sold to the public. Dime novels, cheap paperback books, were the 19th century equivalent of blockbuster movies. They took the basic facts of an outlaw's life and cranked up the drama, turning them into larger-than-life heroes and villains. A cattle rustler became a noble knight of the plains. A bank robber became a folk hero, fighting against corporate greed. The public couldn't get enough of these tales. It was escapism. For people living ordinary, often difficult lives, reading about the adventures of Billy the Kid or Butch Cassidy was a thrilling escape into a world of freedom, danger, and rebellion. So, when we look back at the Wild West, it's important to separate the man from the myth. These weren't characters in a movie. They were real people, living in a brutal and unforgiving environment. Their choices were shaped by war, poverty, and a frontier that had its own set of rules. The legends are entertaining, but the true stories are far more human and complex. They reveal a raw and fascinating chapter of American history, a time when the line between lawman and outlaw was often blurry, and survival was the only law that truly mattered. The Wild West may be gone, but the stories it created, both real and imagined, continue to capture our imagination to this day. Thanks for joining us on this journey into the real Wild West. If you found this as fascinating as I do, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into history. Let me know in the comments which outlaw story you find most compelling. See you next time.